Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for downloading Soundbites on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen, and this is Season 2, Episode 4. I'm Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen, or Dr. K is what I go by, and today I'm going to be going through your recovery. It's a question I get asked so many times in my office and just by athletes passing and heck on social media. I get asked all the time, how can I recover better? What are the things that I need to know? And specifically today, we're going to talk about the differences between both male and female athletes and why for female athletes, there are some things that you actually should be doing that are a little bit different than what kind of mainstream has put out there for so long. And as we've done a little bit more research, we're starting to learn more and more about the differences, as has been the theme of the last season here. But we're going to dive in and teach you a bit more about recovery and why it's important and what are some of the different aspects of it that you can actually do something for better recovery. So let's dive in. So some of the basics, let's cover why do we actually need to recover? Obviously, I mean, we have a wide range of people who are probably listening to this. So some of you may know a lot more about why it's important to recover and be very familiar with it. And for others, it might just be kind of this thing that you want to work out and you want to train for a long period, a lot because you want to create and get to a goal. But it also is important to note that it's not all about training all the time. We do want to spend some time recovering. So let's talk about why. When you are working out, we're basically looking for adaptations in the muscle and also in the brain. So one of the things to keep in mind is that it's not all about the training itself. When you do a workout or a training period of time, yes, you are looking to build muscle tissue, and we'll talk a little bit about how that happens. But we're also looking for your nervous system and your brain to react to that stimuli as well. So one of the benefits of recovery is that when you do a workout and then you finish up and you do what you do as far as nutrition and your patterns and whatever, and you go on about your day, that new stimulus that you did at that point in time, the rest of the day, your brain and you almost like cause confusion to your brain and your muscle tissue. And essentially what they want is to make sure that the next time, if they basically, in lack of better terms, they basically kind of say, okay, I really don't want to be caught unprepared for that again. So what I'm going to do is make sure that we adapt so that if you decide to do that to me again tomorrow, I'm going to be a bit more prepared. And that's essentially what happens. And that's why you're starting to see a lot more of this cross training and bringing on different types of workouts and strength training and high intensity and then long periods of time, this variance right inside of exercise and training is to provide new stimulus and new stimuli to the brain and the muscle tissues so that you get further adaptations, which over time equal, better performance in many different fields. So what happens when your muscle tissues, when you're working out and you essentially want to get that muscle tissue breakdown so that you can recover and build up stronger muscle tissue? What happens is pretty much throughout the entire day, your muscle proteins in your body are constantly turning over. So they're getting broken down and then they're getting made and synthesized into muscle tissue. It's a pretty constant thing. But the thing is, though, is a lot of it is actually determined by the amount of protein and amino acids that are present in your body and in that muscle tissue and in your blood. So what they actually tend to call this is a net muscle protein balance. So you want to make sure that for the amount of protein that's getting broken down, we also have enough to be able to lay new cells in. So you start to see those changes. And this is essentially kind of hinting towards there's changes in the different types of muscle tissue, and they call that the myofibrillar proteins, that those changes can lead to muscle mass. And so a lot of research has been being done to kind of see if you can affect different types of proteins inside the muscle to lead to, even better recovery, right? That's what everybody's always chasing, is better and better recovery. But there really are some basics that stand true over a long period of time. And we're going to talk about those today. So, and then also I did want to mention as well that in this same process, right? So where we're seeing all this breakdown, there are still some different types of main systems that really contribute to this area. So again, I want you guys to be able to recognize these words so that if you do see them pop up, you know what they are. But there are three main systems that really contribute to this breakdown of muscle turnover. And a couple of them, one of them is called UPP, which is ubiquitin proteasomal pathway. There's autophagy, which is basically when we have an autophage, it basically breaks down the cell. And then also it's called the calpain calcium dependent cysteine proteases. Bear with me there. I know those are big words. But basically what those systems are doing at different periods of time is promoting some type of breakdown and then synthesis of muscle tissue. The reason I mention them is because all three of those are all working at the same time to basically contribute to muscle protein breakdown in response to exercise and nutrition. Okay, so it may seem like quite a bit to kind of break down in your brain there for a bit, but the most important thing is that there's so many pieces that are basically going on every time you create some type of muscle tissue breakdown, and it's learning about those that can then lead us to better, optimizing your recovery a little bit better by paying attention to what actually happens in the body, what happens in those muscle tissues, and then what can we do on the other side to really optimize this system so that you can perform better and be back to training better, and really use your exercise and training to your best, right? The other thing too that I want to mention before we move on in this muscle tissue breakdown, why do we need to recover, is the inflammation that tends to happen. And it is a normal process. Remember, when we talk about inflammation, there's a good piece of inflammation and then there's a not so great piece of inflammation, but inflammation is normal. There typically, when you see that muscle tissue breakdown and you start to get sore, what can happen, and some of you may have recognized this too, if you've ever done like a really, 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 really long, hard day of training or really tough workout that really strained your muscles, you may have noticed a little bit of swelling, like water weight around that muscle tissue that's pretty sore. That is inflammation. It's water basically forming in between the cells, and that's how the body's getting a lot of blood and nutrients through the blood to that tissue so that you can repair it. So inflammation is a natural process in this. And one of the things we want to do is make sure that, and we're going to talk about this later, so stay tuned, but inflammation, what we want to do is make sure that we're not putting in a ton of nutrients, like, for example, you'd normally hear us say like antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. Well, there's some ways that we want to do that work well and synergistically with the body, but there's other ones that actually counteract your adaptation to exercise. And so we're going to talk about that at the end in the practical application of what we talk about today. But just keep in mind, inflammation is normal, but we do want to make sure that we're allowing the muscles to do it in the right time, and it's not lasting for long periods of time, because that can cause problems down the road. Okay, so are there differences now between females and males? Yes. Yes, there are. Male skeletal muscles are generally faster and they have higher maximum power output. So they have basically bigger type 2 fibers and also the energy producing enzymes that tend to go along with those. So what we usually see is that men tend to outperform women in very short, intense bursts of effort. But one of the things though is that means that they can tend to have a higher lactate buildup in that muscle tissue, which, as you may have experienced, is that burning that happens, in the middle of your workout. Females, though, they appear to be a little bit more fatigue resistant with a higher recovery rate in general. There's some things that we've talked about before, but we'll talk about them again today, that during repeated contraction type exercise, we tend to do a little bit better, which is sort of interesting. And some of that may have to do with the fact that women just tend to have more type 1 fibers, and they're just slightly more efficient at using fat as fuel and sparing glucose, which mostly means that you just don't necessarily need as long for recovery when it comes to like a give it everything you have type of a workout. So, but there are certain ways where recovery is actually longer for women. And again, we're going to talk about that when we're talking about hormones in the next section. If you also want to learn more too, you can go back to season 2, episode 3, where we talked in depth about how hormones tend to interact with women. But there are just some basic differences that are present between men and women. In some areas, we tend to do pretty well. And then there's other areas where if we really optimize our nutrition and what we know about our bodies, we can perform and we can definitely recover better overall. So let's dive into that. So what happens, what am I talking about here? So one of the things that is present with women throughout your entire cycle is progesterone. It's lower in your day 1 to day 15 part of your cycle, which is day 1 of your period to day 15, which is basically when you ovulate or somewhere around that time. And then progesterone increases between day 15 to the first day of your period. So it starts to go up. So the presence of progesterone basically means that we catabolize muscle more. What does that mean? It means we break down muscle more. The reason we do that is just so that we can mobilize more amino acids and more protein when we need it. The problem though is that kind of counteracts what we want when we train. We really don't want our body trying to dig into our muscles for the source. So instead, we're going to try to counteract that system by putting a lot more in as far as nutrition goes, so that you don't break down your muscle tissue to get the amino acids that you want. So keep that in mind, that one of the best things that you can do is to track your cycle. Then once you know where you are in your cycle, now let's talk about some of the differences that happens there. So when you're in the first half of your cycle, which generally means that progesterone is low, but it is still present, and estrogen tends to be a little bit higher. Well, not a little bit, it's quite a bit higher. You go through this cycle of estrogen being low and going high, and then it drops, and then progesterone takes over from there for the rest of it. But generally speaking, your access to using stored carbs for your muscle tissue is just lower in that first half of your cycle. So it's, and honestly, those carbohydrates that are stored is necessary for both energy during and for recovery after. So you really need to make sure that you are being able to use those stored carbs when you're in that first part of your cycle. One of the ways you can do that is to generally consume carbs throughout your training period. That can be helpful, or around when you're working out. But also, as you're going to hear later on, it's great to be able to eat carbs and have a steady amount of food coming in throughout the day, which we can talk about too, that just keeps you going and doesn't throw anything off, because you don't want to get tired. You don't want to fall into the slump midday because you were kind of out of balance. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. Now, one other thing to remember too is that women burn fat more easily in exercise, but post-exercise, we tend to burn more carbohydrates. And this is really, really important to remember and understand, is because 3 hours post-exercise, women's ability to burn fat drops. Whereas men, it can be up to almost 21 hours afterwards, they're still burning fat. So picture that, a difference between 3 and 21 hours of being able to burn fat. So now pair this with the presence of progesterone and its catabolic effects, remember the breakdown effect, and it really becomes really critical for women to make sure that their protein consumption is on point to reduce muscle tissue breakdown and also reduce the signal to store body fat. Okay, so point being, we're going to need to put in more protein before and after exercise to make sure that you can continue burning muscle, or you can continue burning fat, so you can reduce that signal to store body fat, but also reduce that tendency for women to break down muscle tissue. So we'll talk about like when and how, what's your pre and post workout prep in a couple sections from now. But just so you know, there are some basic differences between men and women, and that's essentially what we see. So next, when we're talking about recovery, you also want to talk about sleep, because sleep has a big role in not only how you recover, but it also plays a role in your mental and emotional health too. And when we're talking about athletes, yeah, we talk about the body and the muscles all the time, but your brain is a significant piece of how you do what you do. So let's remember that basically sleep helps you get maximum replenishment of muscle glycogen. So what does that mean? You store glucose in the form of glycogen in many places of your body. It's in your muscle tissue itself. It's also in your blood, and it'll float around depending on what's going on. Then it'll go to the liver, and you'll have glycogen stores there. And then if the body gets so much of it that it doesn't need it, it'll sometimes store it as fat. But what sleep helps you do is make sure that you're getting enough of that replenishment back of the muscle, glycogen back into your muscle tissue, so that when you go to exercise next or train, or in old times, run from a lion, you have what you need to, sprint, right? And to be able to use it and to get glycogen from your muscle tissue. The other thing that's interesting about sleep is that most likely you've heard about something called the human growth hormone. And what it's basically designed to do is it's designed to help us recover, to help our muscles recover, but it's also there to help us grow, right? Human growth hormone. What's interesting though is that your bloodstream is flooded with it in guess which time? During sleep, right? So obviously we need to make sure that we're sleeping so that we can have some of these resets, allowing our body to be able to take time. Let's reset all these hormones. Let's do all the processes that we need to do so that we're ready to go for the next day. Because, if you think about it, evolutionary wise, back in the day when we were running from lions and needing to make sure that we stayed safe, and we needed something to help us recover, right? So that the next day, whatever we needed at that time, we'd have it. So we needed to be able to recover better. We needed to be able to store certain things and nutrients in our body in different places so that we had access to them when we needed them. That's essentially what's happening here. And it's what you can take advantage of. That knowledge is what you can take advantage of and be able to apply that to your performance. So what's the point though? What we want is good quality and quantity when it comes to sleep. Now it's going to vary between people, right? But if you, generally speaking, they say it's somewhere between 6 to 8 hours is optimal for most people. I tend to find it's that 7 to 8 hour range. Some people need more, about like 8 to 9 hours of sleep. It's just when do you feel the best when you wake up? And you can do a simple sleep journal. You can do an app on your phone where you just wake up in the morning and you record, okay, how many hours did I sleep? And then, do I feel rested right now? And then you can kind of go from there. One thing though that was really interesting when I was looking at a couple studies, what researchers seem to discover in a few different sleep tests is that for a few athletes who slept around 5.5 hours, they had, and this was in response to training and exercise and trying to see if sleep had anything to do with muscle mass over a period of time. And one of the things that they found was that there were, for the athletes that only slept for about 5.5 hours, they had 60% less muscle mass at the end of the study, while those who slept at around like 8 to 8.5 hours had 40% more muscle mass. So it's possible that, and it's probable that sleep does seem to have this pretty significant effect on muscle recovery and growth. And so just keep that in mind. If you aren't sleeping well, there are a lot of things that you can do. One of the other studies that I was looking at as well, they were looking at if you deprive an athlete for 24 hours of sleep and then try to get them to train, what are the effects that seem to happen? And they didn't seem to find that there were any effects on the physical physical production or exercise in and of itself. Like their impact and power was normal, but it was more on their mental status, emotional status, and attitude, which is where things really kind of started to fall apart. So one of the suggestions was, if you have athletes that aren't, sleeping for a good period of time, or if you're 24 hours deprived of sleep, what do we need to focus on? And the suggestion was to, look at mood swings. Are you more susceptible? What are some focus and training exercises that you can do to help train, your mindset and your mindfulness around sleep? Because it will, and it's not sleeping. I mean, you guys, it's not, it's not out of the question, right? You know what happens when you don't sleep very well and you don't sleep for a long period of time. What happens? You get kind of like grumpy, right? Well, that's kind of the same idea here. So it's important to remember, though, that when you are thinking about, okay, I really want to get to this place with my training, or I really want to get to this place as far as where you want to go with your athletic career, sleep is going to be one of those pieces that you really want to get locked down. And if you need to use something like, there's lots of different types of herbal remedies and things that can help, like melatonin and valerian root and different ones that can just start to get that going. Okay, so moving on to the last section before we get into what are you going to do in order to apply it. So as far as I think this is a tricky one, because we're going to talk about stress here for just a brief minute. What you do want to do in general is decrease stress on your body. But there are some things that when we talk about stress, I think that it's kind of this, stress is always so bad, but it's not always that bad. Stress helps you perform. Stress helps you, show up today to record this, right? It gets you to your sport. It gets you to, do a lot of different things. And stress is designed to wake you up in the morning. And then it's the balance of stress, that cortisol hormone with melatonin that gets you to sleep. So stress isn't that bad of a thing, but I do want to talk about it in some context here. Okay. So one of the things that I see a lot in the context of when people ask me that question of how do I recover better? What do I need to do in order to optimize my recovery? One of the first questions is, well, what are you doing that is making you want to recover better? For example, I do work in part of what I do is I do work in a lot of the CrossFit world, and a lot of that training is very high stress on the body. And then we can compare that as well to a lot of ultra runners and endurance athletes that are doing long distances, long periods of time, and it can be repetitive and higher stress on the body. So what can you do in order to make sure that you take your training and make it a slightly lower stress on your body? Well, number one, if you're just getting started out and your body is not used to doing stuff like that, just going at a pace that feels good, that doesn't necessarily hurt, but just helps you get in the reps is one way to just reduce stress on your system. It's getting the reps in. It's making sure you have good form. I'm talking about running and cycling and swimming and any type of weightlifting and training. I mean, all across the board, right? Lower the stress on the body so that over time you can build up and you can adapt, right, to that force and that stress. And you'll see a much healthier body at the end when you all of a sudden start to see your paces start to increase, and you start to see that you're being able to go longer distances and it's not hurting, right? Instead, it's so much better to be a little bit more patient and let your body build up versus just put it all on the system, try to run those, 8, 7, 6-minute miles right off the bat and end up, with your body hurting in, 6 months or so. The other thing too is decreasing stress as far as life goes. And body health too, right? We've talked over the last several episodes about different ways where the body can break down and where we can really start to see problems for any type of person, but also athletes. If your GI tract starts to get pretty out of whack, it can create more inflammation and stress on the body from the inside. Your hormones as well. If we're talking about thyroid health, if we're talking about reproductive health, we talked about a lot of hormones even in this one here today, right? Like cortisol and melatonin. We also talked about human growth hormone. They all play different roles for us in our just daily existence. But when they are not functioning, when those systems aren't functioning at 100%, that can lead to increased stress inside the body. And then there's also, of course, we get exposure to different things that can increase things like oxidative stress on the body, which are like toxins and environmental pollution, stuff like that. And so one of the best things to do is, number one, pay attention, know when those signs seem to be creeping in. And also, like, I do realize we at this point in time are recording this in a strange year where there's a lot of stress in many different ways on a lot of people, whether that's financial to just the change in our social structure in general. And many athletes, a lot of your events have all been canceled. Trust me, I know. It happened to me too. And I'm having to readdress and kind of refocus on what's important. The key, though, is to just make sure that if stress is one of those things that you don't really account for or do anything about, taking a step back, looking at what is going on in your life. Are there areas where you can improve? Can you add in meditation for just a brief, like 5-minute period of time in the morning? Do you need to add in more breathing time? Is learning how to breathe properly something that would have a significant impact on your health and on your body? There's just they don't have to be super long and intense, and just, it doesn't have to be this weighty thing that, oh gosh, I gotta meditate today, or I gotta work on my stress. They're designed to become, oh, I'm just going to take this short period of time for myself to just breathe and settle in and just make sure that I'm taking care of me. And that's important. And I think that's important for athletes, and it's important for everybody. Okay, so we're going to lead into the last piece of this here, which is always the fun part. It's how do you apply all the things that we talked about today? So nutrition for recovery is key. And we already even talked about some of the lifestyle things, right, that you can do. Meditation for stress, or breathing exercises for stress, or heck, going outside, going for a brief walk, moving every day, lifestyle type things that can have a very, very strong impact on your body. But when it comes to nutrition, there are some things that we can do. So let's look at pre and post workout prep, because it's the most important thing that you can do. First off, protein. We talked about this, right? We said progesterone breaks down our tissues, lots of catabolism. So how can we counteract this a bit and make sure that, number one, we're being able to burn fat for longer, and number two, we're not breaking down those tissues so that we're, activating a lot of amino acids from our muscles. We want to get it from our food. So protein. Branched chain amino acids are a supplement that can be very, very helpful. They're usually in like a pill form. Some people have them in a powder that they put into their, pre-workout shake. Branched chain amino acids before and even sometimes during a workout, if you're going to be working out for a super long period of time, making sure that you have some of those around can be very, very helpful. Part of that is because some of the branched chain amino acids, they can get between the blood-brain barrier and have an impact not only on our neurological health, but also on our body and on our muscles. So then the next thing is that post-workout prep. So think about doing a shake, or it's even better if you can do whole food within 30 minutes of working out. I think one of the best things that was ever taught to me and told to me when I was trying to figure out how this all works was eat quickly after working out. It's a very, very important thing. And I guess one of the things they also said in caveat to that was, if you can eat whole food and like a meal within 30 minutes of working out, that's ideal. If you don't have that prepped, or if you don't really like to eat after a workout, or if something about that, like timing wise, is just off for that day or whatever, that's when a shake can be really helpful. So whey protein tends to be quickly absorbed by the stomach versus casein, which gets into your intestines. I tend to like whey protein a little bit more than casein. I know that it's used in there's a lot of really great studies that have shown a lot of benefits with that, but the casein itself, I've seen, can also create inflammation through the gut if people are sensitive to dairy or whatever. So I tend to say, if you can eat whole food, that'll be a lot better. But again, if you need to fall back on something, do a shake, do like a whey protein something or other between when you end and 30 minutes after you're working out. Just do it right away. So you get that into your system, into your blood, and then your body's not going to go to your muscle tissue to pull that amino acid out. Okay. Now, the next thing is also to make sure that you're eating enough throughout your day. We talked about this also. I mentioned it briefly above. When you skip meals, it tends to start this cycle where, so for example, I know that breakfast does not have to be for everybody, but I want you to consider something. If you train early in the morning, this is a little bit different. If you eat after your workout, that's fine. But I'm talking about the people, like if you are the type of person that tends to not really like to eat breakfast, and then you maybe work out around 12 or 1 o'clock, and then by the time 1 o'clock comes around, you're pretty darn hungry. What can happen is we see this pattern of overeating a little bit later in the day, specifically on carbs. Then that can lead to a little bit more fatigue. And then I start to see that, 2 or 3 o'clock caffeine source, like a coffee or a soda, options that I would have you probably switch. But if you're doing that 2 or 3 o'clock caffeine in the middle of the afternoon, well, what's that going to do? It's going to wake you up at the moment, but it's going to probably lead to poorer sleep later in the evening. And then you see the cycle of what happens there. So if we can get you to eat even just a little bit earlier, it doesn't have to be like right when you wake up in the morning, but if we can get you a few different meals throughout the day that are a little bit more balanced, then that is going to lead to, hopefully, you not needing that caffeine in the afternoon. That way you can let your cortisol levels drop. Their melatonin will now be able to come up in the evening, and you'll actually be able to sleep better. And that means, right, better recovery. So can you see how that all connects? All right. So then the next thing I wanted to talk about is vegetables. Don't forget your veggies. When I talked about eating whole food, I really do mean this. No matter where you so no matter what, remember we talked about last week, we talked about how if your carbohydrates will change, right? They'll change throughout the month, but they're also going to change as you age. Your carbohydrate requirements tend to go down as you age beyond menopause, for example. But it doesn't so that is on its own. But vegetables are like free for all. You can go for them in as many quantities as you want, because they just have so many nutrients in them. They have all the enzymes that go along with it. Your body will use what it needs and get rid of the rest. And they have really great fiber, which means a super healthy gut. So one of the things that you can always remember is that when you're looking at nutrition and you're trying to figure out what do I need to do in order to do my best, you really want to focus on making sure you're eating enough protein. And for women, making sure you're eating enough protein means you're probably not eating enough protein. So if you have questions about that, I highly recommend talking to somebody who understands this stuff and can say, okay, what are you eating now? And then what do we need to do in order to make sure you're, eating enough? And what do we need to do in order to make sure you're going to accomplish your goals? Let's take a look and make sure you're doing it properly. So getting enough protein is huge. Also, really good healthy fats. We'll talk about what those are in a second. And then, of course, your veggies and fruits. And you can fill in with your starchy carbs as you want. Your whole grains, your sweet potatoes, and all of those really yummy things. Those can all fill in around that picture right there. So what's the key here? Fuel properly. And if you can, use whole food. So what are good fats? Good fats are things like avocados, nut butters, nuts and seeds, but there's a caveat to that. Have you ever sat down on the couch and taken a handful of already shelled pistachios? How many more do you think you eat than when you have to shell them yourself? One of the things that I think was built in by nature, in a sense, is that if you actually went out to harvest nuts from a bush or a tree in your yard, you probably wouldn't eat nearly as many nuts as if you were actually shelling them yourself. And the nuts they can be very high in carbs. They can also be very high in fats, which is awesome. They're a great energy source. But I think that because they come shelled and in these big, massive bags and containers, we can tend to overeat on them a little bit. So just know that if you are going to go and grab like a handful of nuts and seeds, do it in a sense, like think about it. If I were to have to shell all of these, how many would I probably eat? And then go for that. then, but don't just not eat them. Nuts and seeds have great benefits. So just keep that in mind. Okay. And then what are some other ones? Like extra virgin organic olive oils are fantastic for using for salad dressings and for topping, on different types of foods. They're packed with all sorts of different nutrients and antioxidants. So great source of fat there. I wouldn't cook with that though. If you're going to cook with a different oil, if that's the case, or heck, butter if you can. Salmon and meats also are going to be really good fats. Okay, now recovery. There's a couple of others. I'm not going to go into like the slew of all of them because there's like a million different supplements that are said to be helpful for recovery. But one of the ones I really did want to talk about was turmeric, because what I did, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but when I did my master's in human nutrition and functional medicine, I did my thesis on what are the difference, like can branched chain amino acids or what's the difference, right, between branched chain amino acids or turmeric on recovery, which is very, I didn't realize it at the time that I'd be referencing that quite as much as I do. But one of the things that I found is that branched chain amino acids are helpful for recovery. They're just different, right? And so we talked about that a little bit earlier. It's a lot better if you can, and especially for women, it's a lot better if you can take those pre-workout and during, and then follow up with a protein. But turmeric, though, in its active form is really called curcumin. So you might see that. But the effects that curcumin can have is an anti-inflammatory effect on the muscle tissue itself. So you tend to see the adaptations from the exercise that you did without getting too much of that soreness. And so curcumin can be helpful. The one thing that you do want to make sure of is that it's not very readily absorbed. So you'll often find that it's mixed with something like pepperine or black pepper, because that increases the absorption through the GI tract. And you'll also want to make sure, if you do go down that road, that you want a quality supplement. Really, really important there. And I think that was it as far as the sort of the differences between the two. Curcumin was something you could take, periodically, or if you know that you have kind of a higher training day coming up, or if, you did a high training day and you could tell things weren't going to be feeling super great the next day, taking something like curcumin for a couple days does seem to reduce the time that you spend with like that delayed onset muscle soreness. So the last one that I wanted to mention, because it's so popular right now, is tart cherry juice. And I've seen a lot of really positive research articles for tart cherry juice being really effective. I've seen others that are like, meh, like maybe. One of the things that I think is most important about tart cherry juice is that if you're going to use something like that, I just really recommend that you take it every day, because there was a study that I saw that basically said if you can be taking it every day, then the effects of it were a lot better than if you just randomly drank tart cherry juice, like, the day of or the night before going out for a really long run. Does that make sense? But that leads me, the reason I mentioned it though, is because that leads me to my last point. Remember when I stressed eating whole food? A lot of supplements that are out there for recovery, and I'm doing that with quotations with my fingers, is that they can be high in a lot. You've kind of, I think, in some ways been sold that you need to be taking all these different types of vitamins and minerals, and that's not always the case. And I think this is a really important point, because I know that the first episode that we did was on nutrient deficiencies and what can you do to counteract those. And the biggest thing is, again, eating whole food, but then getting a test, not just randomly taking a bunch of supplements to fill in gaps when you don't know if there are any. And here's why. In that same master's thesis that I did, vitamin C, I was looking at what are some of the effects of some of like antioxidants, right, on muscle tissue and the body itself. And one of the things that I found and I came across was an article that talked about how vitamin C can actually limit adaptations from exercise. So instead of, you do get that anti-inflammatory effect, but you don't get the same adaptations from the training that you did until a little bit later. Whereas with curcumin and branched chain amino acids, you pretty much saw an unopposed adaptation from exercise. Isn't that interesting? And then there's also been some other studies too, where antioxidants have in supplement form have just had not the best impact on the body. Now, I realize that vitamin C is one of those things that's really helpful for your immune system. And so you might be thinking, I'm taking lots of vitamin C right now because of things that are going on. But I do want you to just remember that you can get a ton of vitamin C and different types of vitamins and minerals from just eating good food like fruits and veggies. And what they found too is that usually when you get it through food, we just don't see the same like negative impacts that we do when we test supplements on people. Isn't that interesting? So when you eat whole food, just to reiterate, you get the enzymes that go along with the vitamins and minerals so that you absorb them better. You help promote good bacteria in your gut, which can help you with a symbiotic relationship, meaning they help you and they help us, right? We help them, they help us. And they'll help you break down some of that stuff so that you can actually absorb it. And sometimes even when they're breaking down certain types of foods, they'll create other types of vitamins and minerals like vitamin K, which we need, and we absorb it once they break it down, right? So there's a lot of different things that are important, and sometimes just taking a supplement is just not exactly the right idea. Okay, so to wrap that up, eat whole food if you can. If you need to take a supplement, just know that what you're taking and make sure you actually know that you need to be taking it. And if you can, increase protein. And if you need to, you can do something like branched chain amino acids, turmeric, stuff like that to really help balance out those delayed onset muscle soreness as you need it. But again, protein is going to be your best source for really optimizing this system and counteracting the effects of progesterone on your muscles. Okay, so that's our episode for now. You'll be able to see the links to the references on wispsports.com. Please make sure to follow Wisp Sports on all social media channels and make sure to share this episode with anyone you think may love it. We really appreciate that. It helps us get this episode out there. And this is stuff that we think, and I think for sure everybody needs to know. I get asked about it all the time. So if you have heard or talked with somebody about it, I would love for you to share it with them. You can also follow me, Dr. K, at Dr. Kirstin. That's DrKirstin on Facebook and Instagram, and drkirstin.com. If you'd like to reach us with any comments or questions about this episode, you can at info@wispsports.com. And that is it. Thank you so much for listening. And we will be back in a few weeks for another very informative episode. Thanks for listening, guys.